What if I told you that there is a slice of Russia very deep into mainland Europe? This is the story of the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is located, it's wedged between Poland to the south and Lithuania to the north, and it is a Baltic Sea port. How did Kaliningrad come to be? Well, it was part of the partition of Germany after World War II, and this area was formerly part of the German province of East Prussia. And the city inside of this area was called Königsberg. But it was surrendered to the Russians as part of the partition of Europe post World War II, and which then led that slice of land to be Russian territory and changed from Königsberg to Kaliningrad. And modern-day Kaliningrad has a population of about 600,000 residents, and it is on the decline. And this has always been Russia's trump card when it comes to dealing with NATO and Europe. A trump card that has become much more fragile, but also much more important to Vladimir Putin at the same time. Kaliningrad is the only ice-free port that the Russians have on the European side of things. Even Murmansk, the Arctic city, is generally ice-free, but out into the Arctic Ocean, it's not. Whereas Kaliningrad is on the Baltic Sea, and the Baltic Sea is ice-free generally year-round. The entire body of water is. And so Kaliningrad is important in that regard because of its it's also the base of what is called the Baltic Sea Fleet that Russia keeps hosted in the port at Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is also key because nuclear missiles are housed there, and a strike to mainland Europe by Russia would actually be very easy from Kaliningrad, considering that it directly borders Poland and Lithuania. This has not always been a problem for Russia because in the days of the Soviet bloc, before the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, Poland and Lithuania were both Warsaw Pact countries. So they were directly influenced by Russia as well as the rest of the Baltic states, including Latvia and Estonia. So these were all under Russian and Soviet influence until 1991. In that year, Poland broke from the Warsaw Pact. Well, actually, Poland broke from the Warsaw Pact several years before that under Lech Walesa and Solidarity in one of their first free elections in 1984. And the Baltic states in 1991 in turn declared their independence as the rest of the Soviet Union also fell apart in that year. And so those countries were initially Russian favoring, but now all four countries are part of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, probably the most fearsome alliance in the history of the planet. So Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and Poland are now NATO allies. And then on the other side of the Baltic Sea, from Kaliningrad, you also have Finland, Norway, and Sweden. And those are all also now NATO members, with the addition of Sweden and Finland being within the past year. So Kaliningrad is effectively walled off by NATO at this point. So it is both a choke point and, for nuclear threats, a very viable position, as well as the position on the international waters of the Baltic Sea, which gives Russia ocean access to the West. their ocean access to the east, of course, is in the far eastern port of Vladivostok. And so that's where the Pacific Fleet is. But Kaliningrad is deep in European Union NATO territory, but is a part of Russia. Now the question that remains, given recent events, is how long will that be the case? Well, the correct answer is who knows. But the general answer is that given that I'm 53, Russia could lose Kaliningrad within my lifetime. And if you're in your 20s or 30s, I would say at this point that it's an almost certainty that they will lose Kaliningrad in your lifetime. A non-binding poll was recently taken within the Kaliningrad Oblast online. And the people who voted in this online poll were already heavily favored towards independence. But what this poll basically asked online was, how willing are you to be independent of the Russian Federation? 72% said yes, they would vote for independence. Now this is only about 100,000 of the 600,000 population in Kaliningrad, so it's not really a representative sample. And these people, like I said, were already inclined towards independence to begin with, so they were willing to risk their freedom to vote in this online poll, because I'm pretty sure that Putin would never allow this poll to happen as a physical referendum. But 72% of about 1/6 of the population of Kaliningrad voting in favor of independence does not show that it would be a guarantee, but it does show that there is a simmering undercurrent of independence from Russia that is set up by Kaliningrad. Lithuania also recently made a strategic strike against Kaliningrad. And because the three Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania all removed themselves from the Russian power grid, the net effect of this being that energy from Russia to reach Kaliningrad had to go through Lithuania, as does most of the road and train traffic. At the moment, Kaliningrad has to self-sustain itself for energy purposes. And as far as energy shipments is concerned, this is where that Baltic Sea Fleet is keeping them alive at the moment. So the lights are still on in Kaliningrad, but it's coming at an expensive price, given that the Baltics are now independent of the Russian power grid, and they are now tied with, well, themselves for energy generation, and they also get help from their NATO allies across the Baltic Sea in the form of the Swedes and the Norwegians, and the Finns. So Sweden and Finland, the newest NATO members, by the way, are now pitching in with their own shipments across the Baltic to help the Baltic states in this. Now, the net effect of the Baltic states being NATO members now, of course, is obviously Article 5 in the NATO treaty, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all. And if any member is attacked, the rest are obligated to help out. Which means that a Russian attack, whether it be from the Russian mainland or from Kaliningrad, would almost certainly start World War III. It's a virtual guarantee. And of course, Kaliningrad has nukes, And Russia's been threatening nukes on the Baltics for probably as long as anybody can remember, since 1991. Kaliningrad does not have much economically of its own. It doesn't produce very much in terms of energy of its own. Its economic lifeline is entirely the Russian Federation itself and the military installations such as the Baltic Sea Fleet. This drives most of Kaliningrad's economy. It doesn't have any agriculture to speak of. The city takes up the majority of the oblast, but there's a small area surrounding the city itself that is part of the Kaliningrad Oblast that could be considered rural and arable, but it's not very high quality. Most of Kaliningrad's goods do have to be imported, and they do have to be shipped in across the Baltic Sea and across the Atlantic Ocean. And given the NATO situation, there are not very many friendly countries in the neighborhood that are willing to exactly pitch in and help. So at some point, Kaliningrad could be starved into submission. And that undercurrent, if people do not have jobs and cannot be fed, that undercurrent of independence could become a raging inferno. And as such, that's a very dicey situation for Putin. So this is a very strategic little piece of land, not part of Russia geographically, but politically and in sovereignty it is. It is called an exclave, which means it is physically separated from the rest of mainland Russia, in this case by about 150 miles, of a combination of Lithuanian, Polish, and the third country to the east is Belarus. All border Kaliningrad. Belarus, of course, is a friendly nation for the purposes of Kaliningrad. Right now, Russia is in a situation where they are actually no longer exporting energy. Russia is now a net energy importer, thanks to the sanctions and actions of the Ukrainian war. Ukraine has bombed Russia refineries to the point where 38% of Russia's refining capacity is presently offline. They don't even have enough to fuel their own country. Belarus is helping both Russia and the Kaliningrad Oblast. So they're a necessity key to keeping the city and the oblast functional at this point. But to be honest, I don't know how much longer that can continue. Belarus is a good energy producer, but it's not one of the prime top 20 in the world energy producers either. So they're basically the equivalent of plugging a leaking dike in Holland with fingers. So these are all the pressures that are present on the Kaliningrad Oblast. Pressures that could either escalate very rapidly or could be a slow leak over time. We don't know. But this is the story of Kaliningrad, the piece of Russia that is 150 miles or so from the Russian mainland. And it's a very strategic and very important part of Russia, but it's also extremely vulnerable at this point. And we do not know how long it's going to remain the case. So that's it for tonight's edition. You folks have a good night, and I'll have something else for you all tomorrow. Peace out, homies.